We haven't touched on one other story that's been driving the week, and that is the Democratic Party's autopsy, which was shambolic, but it also set up some really critical questions. Why did the Democrats lose? And how can they actually fix their problems if they want to win again in the future? So let's take a look at those questions in this week's Deep Dive.
Let's go beyond the headlines. It's time for a deep dive.
Over the past week, Democrats have been consumed by infighting, finger-pointing, and blame-storming after the Democratic Party released its so-called autopsy of what happened in the 2024 election and why Kamala Harris lost. What I want to do is cut through all of that and tell you quickly what the report got wrong, and then tell you exactly why Harris actually lost based on what the numbers actually say. And finally, let's take a look at the deeper problem that Democrats are really facing and why there's a good chance that they'll be able to solve it in the next couple of years if they focus on the right things. First, let's be clear that the report was basically gobbledygook. It was drafted by a political consultant who got half done with it, and then the party chairman, Ken Martin, decided he didn't like where it was coming together, so he tried to bury it. Then CNN leaked it, so then they released it anyway. Oh, Democrats. We always nail this kind of thing. For what it's worth, the few conclusions it did reach were focused on the wrong things. The report put most of the blame for Kamala Harris losing on all kinds of tactical decisions the pundits and political professionals tend to obsess about. They claimed that the messages didn't define Trump enough. They didn't go negative enough. Democrats didn't engage rural Americans or men or didn't do enough digital ads. Let's just clear this up right now. None of this rearranging the deck chairs tells the real story. In fact, Kamala Harris did better than models would predict, according to Elliot Morris. If you take the most predictive numbers, which are basically the incumbent president's approval rating and how voters feel about the economy, Harris did about a percentage point better than she might have been expected to. So what were the real reasons Harris lost? An actual intelligent analysis conducted by Blueprint, a Democratic public opinion research group, tells the whole story right in the title. Why America Chose Trump: Inflation, Immigration, and the Democratic Brand. Boom. Pretty simple. Their polling shows that the top three reasons voters chose not to vote for Harris were, in their words, inflation was too high under the Biden-Harris administration, too many immigrants were illegally crossing the border under the Biden-Harris administration, and, quote, Kamala Harris is too focused on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle class. That last one was the most frequently cited criticism given among swing voters who broke for Trump. Inflation, immigration, and a liberal cultural brand. And again, none of this is that surprising. All around the world, incumbents took it on the chin in 2024 because of high prices. For the first time in recorded history, every single governing party facing election in a developed country lost vote share in 2024. But that brings us to the longer-term issue. And this is where Democrats should be a little nervous. This brand problem is real. Here's a test you can try out for yourself at home right now. Try to say out loud in just one sentence what the Democratic Party stands for. If you manage to do that, now try doing the test in a group of people out loud and get everyone to say their sentence at the same time. See if there's any overlap at all. I'll bet you there's very little. The truth is, voters have no idea what we really stand for, and because nature abhors a vacuum, Republicans and Fox News, as if there's a difference, have been all too happy to supply a brand for us. Trump's political right-hand man, James Blair, has issued the tagline that Democrats are weak, woke, and far too liberal. The fact is that we're having a hard time breaking away from that label. Take immigration, for example. It's true that border crossings rose significantly in 2021 through 2022. President Biden got a little too lax about the border for most Americans' taste. But did you know that in 2023 he pivoted? Did you know that Biden had more deportations in 2024 than Trump did in 2025? It's true. You can look it up. Back in 2014, President Obama had twice as many as Trump did last year. But that's not the way that American voters see Democrats as leaders. And Kamala Harris was tied to that brand and couldn't work past it. But like I said at the top, there really is good news here. At least if you're a Democrat, because Democrats have been here before. In 1988, Michael Dukakis got crushed because of voter perceptions that Democrats were too weak and too liberal. Sound familiar? Between 1990 and 1992, Bill Clinton emerged from the primary process on the strength of running as a new Democrat. As a result, the entire brand of the Democratic Party shifted. That's what happens when parties pick a new leader. Party brands aren't built in a lab. They're built by a leader. So the good news is that right now, Democrats are in an ultra strong position to be successful in the 2026 midterms. And then, even though the next presidential primary promises to be a painful process, that's a lot of P's, if the party can get through it, they'll have an opportunity to redefine their brand and move forward. One final note, a must-do item for the Democratic Party. I mentioned Bill Clinton a moment ago. If people remember anything about his campaign in '92, it's the campaign haiku that his advisor James Carville came up with. Change versus more of the same. The economy, stupid. And don't forget healthcare. It's that first part that really matters. Yes, of course, Democrats should continue to run on healthcare and the economy, duh. But change is the dominant theme in American politics, and it has been for decades. Since 1979, the median percentage of us who say we're dissatisfied with the way things are going in the United States has been 70%. In 2024, 53% of voters told pollster David Shore that things were going so poorly in America that what was needed goes beyond mere change. They wanted a shock to the system. 3/4 of voters told Navigator Research that the entire American political and economic system needs major changes or should be torn down completely. So Democrats need to remember this one thing. There are basically only two kinds of campaigns to run in American politics. You can say to voters, let's stay the course, or you can say, it's time for a change. The voters have been crystal clear which one they want. The take home, we need to clean up our brand, and Democrats need to become the party of change again. That's the challenge if we want to win in the future.
That was excellent. I love how you boiled that down into something that actually makes sense and cut through all that other bullshit that's out there. One of the things I want to pick up here on is that politics is not really about issues or even policy. It's a marketing campaign. I'm going to try to get you to buy a product. We use issues as a wedge, as a tool to get you to buy that product. The part about the brand is so important. You think about this as a Google review whenever you want to go to a restaurant and you think about going to dinner. If it's crap, you go somewhere else. And that was the fundamental problem, I think, you had with Harris. It was part Biden and his failures as president, but it's equal parts that we in the Republican Party branded him and tied it to Harris. And that's why the culture wars worked for us. That's why immigration worked for us. Is the reality is that we don't think Democrats really want to let in dangerous criminals into the United States. We know they don't want open borders, but winning elections is about convincing voters that they do. And look, the Democrats do it too. And I'm not saying it's uniquely Republican, but this is the game we play, and that's what the battlefield looks like. And that's why branding is such a key piece of what you talked about for the Democrats. And the one thing that can overcome a bad brand is really the economy. And if the economy is bad, the voters really want that change.
Let me pick up on your culture point and your brand point for just a second. You reminded me of 25 years ago, McDonald's tried to roll out a more sophisticated, adult, and higher quality burger. They called it the McDLT. It didn't work. Why? Because the restaurant selling it was McDonald's. They have a brand. The position that Harris occupied was she could sell policies that people individually would tell pollsters, yeah, I like that policy. I like it better. But it was a McDLT coming from McDonald's, right?
That's exactly right.
They didn't want to buy the burger because they're like, yeah, but it's coming from McDonald's. I just don't trust it. And that's the issue. And we have to remember as Democrats that politics is downstream from culture. We have to address what we know are weak points. We don't have to throw groups that we affiliate with, identities that we affiliate with under the bus in order to be able to do it. We've already seen this with Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. She's someone who championed the Equality Act to secure federal non-discrimination protections for LGBTQIA plus Americans. She supports marriage equality. She also says, look, I'm the mother of 3 daughters. I think we should trust local communities to work out questions like, is it okay for a trans girl to be on one of their sports teams or not? And people were cool with that. If you can find a way to diffuse a position, like for example, on immigration, there's a pretty clear path to do it. We're actually going to be tough on the border. We'll go after criminals, but we're not going to do any of this nonsense and authoritarian goon squad crackdown on Americans stuff that people hate. It's really not that hard to get right on these issues without shivving your allies. is an absolute must do. But just to pick up on your point about change, if Democrats don't get that part right and become the party of change again, they're sunk, no matter what else they do.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece, because a lot of Republicans, especially MAGA, want to believe that Trump won this election because he had so much better issues and that people just love him. The reality is voters wanted change. They did not like the direction the country was going. And so it wasn't as much of a vote for Trump as it was against what was happening. One of the challenges they have is that some of the highest profile Democrats, people like AOC, people like Mondami, are pushing a different message, and the change they're pushing almost plays into the Republican hands. And so what's interesting about that autopsy and what's interesting about the analysis that you did is you stripped away kind of the bullshit side of this and said, this is where Democrats have to go. And quite frankly, if Democrats listen to you, Republicans should be very worried in 2028.
I'm glad you invoked bullshit, because this is usually the part in the show where we do the that's bullshit segment. But this week we felt like the deep dive rolled the bullshit right into it, because that's essentially what this autopsy was. But just to pick up on your point, and even invoking Mamdani, what Democrats can take away from this is, okay, change. We've got to embrace change. But it can't just be like that Obama poster, which I included in this video, from 2008. Change. Okay, what do you mean? It still has to connect to the core problem in voters' lives. So step one, defuse the culture issues. Step two, embrace change, but make it specific, connect it to people's real economic pain. And there are plenty of great ideas for how to do that. We don't have to embrace all of Mamdani's solutions to learn the lesson that he's trying to teach, which is, let's get directionally right, even if the details aren't quite right. So there are ideas out there. Lawrence Winterman, who I mentioned earlier in the show, suggests let's have taxation of some kind on AI agents. Every time you use a token when you're using AI, that should go into a fund which could fund wage support, job loss support for people who are displaced by technology. This is a real problem that affects people in communities all across America. What about actually the US? This is an idea that Trump has actually done. I actually think it's a good idea. What about taking a piece of the action on these frontier AI companies through a sovereign wealth fund? It's something that other countries have done, and we could do as well. I'm not sure that any of those specifics is exactly right, but I do think that if Democrats take the core message here, which is we're going to deal with culture, we're going to embrace change, and we're going to connect it through economic ideas that really address people's problems, that's the pathway forward. That's what we need to do to get back in the game for 2028.